Ambassador Jinho Kim walked slowly through the bright hallways of Station Nexus. The huge space station floated in the darkness between stars, serving as the main meeting place for all the different alien species in the galaxy. Jinho had dreamed of this day for many years. He was the first human diplomat to attend such an important trade meeting with the Galactic Council. His hands were sweating slightly as he approached the security checkpoint. What happened next confused him completely. The tall, crystal-like security guard stopped him with a polite gesture. Jinho watched in amazement as dozens of alien delegates walked right past the checkpoint without stopping. Many of them carried weapons that sparkled and glowed under the station's lights. "Please remove all metal objects, Ambassador Kim," the security officer said, in a kind but firm voice. The translator device in Jinho's ear made the alien's words sound perfectly clear. Jinho stared as a group of blue-skinned Thaxian diplomats marched past him. Each one had a curved energy sword hanging from their belt. The weapons hummed with power. Right behind them, 3 bug-like Zephyrians clicked and buzzed as they walked. Bright electric sparks jumped between their claws. Even the tiny who were no taller than Jinho's waist, carried small poisoned darts in decorated cases. "I don't understand," Jinho said, slowly taking his pen from his jacket pocket. "Why am I the only one going through this screening process?" The crystal security officer's body flickered with different colors. Jinho had learned during his training that this was how their species showed nervousness. The guard carefully took Jinho's pen and placed it in a special metal box. "Please also remove your tablet, stylus, belt buckle, and any other metal items." The officer requested. Jinho looked down at his simple black belt and pulled it off. The metal buckle made a soft clink as it landed in the collection tray. His tablet stylus joined it, along with his watch and even the small metal buttons on his jacket sleeves. "This seems excessive," Jinho said, watching another group of aliens pass by freely. That Drachnary delegate just walked through with what looks like a plasma cannon on his back. "Different species, different protocols," the security officer replied, but its crystal body continued flickering with nervous colors. A tall, elegant alien with green skin and 4 arms approached the checkpoint. Jinho recognized her as Ambassador Yellatree from the Centauri Republic. She carried an ornate staff that clearly contained some kind of energy weapon. The crystal guard simply nodded respectfully as she passed through without stopping. "But why?" Jinho pressed. "What makes humans different? Are we considered dangerous?" The security officer paused for a long moment. Its crystalline head tilted slightly, and more colors swirled through its transparent body. Historical Precedent 2847 Alpha. Ambassador Kim, all humans must surrender potential weapons before entering any diplomatic area of this station. Potential weapons? Jinho held up his hands. "It's just a pen. I use it to sign documents and take notes. Especially pens," the officer replied with what sounded like emphasis. Jinho felt his frustration growing. "This doesn't make sense. Look around you. Half these delegates are carrying actual weapons, and you're worried about my writing instruments?" A group of reptilian Saurian diplomats walked past, their ceremonial warhammers clanking against their armor. Behind them came 3 floating ethereal representatives, their energy fields crackling visibly around their ghostly forms. None of them were stopped or searched. "Sir," the security officer said patiently, "I must also ask you to remove your shoes. Standard protocol for human delegates. My shoes. What could possibly be dangerous about my shoes? The laces, Ambassador, and the hard soles. And, well, they are shoes attached to human feet." Jinho sat down heavily on a nearby bench and began unlacing his black diplomatic shoes. Other delegates continued streaming past, some glancing curiously at the human, who was apparently so dangerous that even his footwear required inspection, as he handed over his shoes. Jinho noticed something interesting. Several of the alien delegates were whispering to each other and pointing in his direction, but they didn't look angry or disgusted. They looked nervous, maybe even a little scared. Officer Jinho said carefully, "How long have these restrictions been in place?" 53 years, 4 months, and 16 days. The crystal being replied immediately, "That's very specific. What happened 53 years ago?" The security officer's entire body went completely transparent for a moment, then returned to its normal translucent state. "I am not authorized to discuss historical precedent 2847 Alpha, Ambassador Kim. I can only enforce the protocols that resulted from it." Jinho nodded slowly. Something had happened involving humans decades ago, something significant enough to create these unusual security measures. But what? And why did every alien species seem to know about it, except humanity itself? The security officer handed Jinho a pair of soft slippers. "You may proceed to the diplomatic quarter, Ambassador. Your personal items will be returned when you leave the station." As Jinho walked away in his borrowed slippers, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was much more to this story. Whatever had happened 53 years ago, it had clearly left a lasting impression on the galactic community. He needed to find out what it was. 3 days had passed since Jinho arrived at Station Nexus, and the trade negotiations were not going well. The human delegation sat at a small table in the corner of the great meeting hall, while larger alien species dominated the center discussions. Jinho felt frustrated and confused about many things, but especially about the strange weapon restrictions that seemed to apply only to humans. During lunch break, he sat alone in the station's main dining area, picking at his meal of processed protein and wondering if this whole diplomatic mission was a mistake. The food tasted bland and artificial, nothing like the home-cooked Korean meals his grandmother used to make. "May I join you, Ambassador Kim?" a wet, gurgling voice asked from behind him. Jinho turned to see a tall, blue-green creature approaching his table. The being moved with graceful, flowing motions, and water dripped constantly from its smooth skin onto the floor. Jinho recognized him as one of the delegates he had seen during the opening ceremonies. "Of course, please sit," Jinho replied, gesturing to the empty chair across from him. "I am Ambassador Velthor, of the Nereid Coalition," the aquatic being said, as he settled into the specially designed chair that immediately filled with water. Small gills along his neck opened and closed rhythmically. "I have been watching your situation with great interest." Jinho raised an eyebrow. "My situation? The weapon restrictions, of course." Velthor's large, dark eyes blinked slowly. "In my 7 centuries of diplomatic service, I have never witnessed such specific security protocols applied to a single species. It is most unusual." 7 centuries. Jinho nearly choked on his drink. "How old are you?" "Young for my species. Barely 800 years old." Velthar made a sound that might have been laughter. "But that is not important. What interests me is the mystery surrounding your people." Jinho leaned forward eagerly. Finally, someone who might have answers. "Do you know why these restrictions exist?" Velthar's webbed fingers tapped thoughtfully against the table. "I have been researching this question since you arrived. My species keeps detailed historical records of all galactic events. According to my findings, the restrictions were put in place exactly 53 years, 4 months, and 16 days ago." The security officer mentioned something called Historical Precedent 2847 Alpha. "Yes, precisely." Velthor's gills fluttered with excitement. "The official designation for what the records call the Reception Hall Incident. But here is where the mystery deepens, my friend." Jinho waited as Velthar pulled out a waterproof data tablet from somewhere beneath the table. The device glowed with soft blue light as the amphibian delegate scrolled through files. "The records from that time period are, how do you humans say, heavily classified? Most information has been sealed or removed entirely, but I have found some basic facts." "What kind of facts?" "The incident involved 3 parties, Velthar said, counting on his webbed fingers. First, Humans, obviously. Second, the Kethmori Empire. Third, the Elder Cyclone Confederacy. All three species were present at some kind of diplomatic reception. Jinho had never heard of the Kethmori before. What happened to them? Velthar's expression grew serious. That is perhaps the most disturbing part of this mystery. The Kethmori Empire no longer exists. You mean they left the galactic community? No, Ambassador Kim. I mean they are extinct. Completely extinct. Their entire species died out shortly after the reception hall incident. Jinho felt a chill run down his spine. How is that possible? Most curious indeed, Velthar continued, his voice dropping to a whisper, especially considering that the Kethmori were among the most militarily advanced species in known space. They had conquered dozens of star systems. Their warriors were legendary for their size and fighting ability. Some records describe them as nearly indestructible, and they just disappeared. Within 2 years of the incident, their entire empire collapsed. Planets abandoned, fleets scattered, population centers empty. Velthor's skills moved rapidly, a sign of agitation in his species. No one speaks of exactly what happened to them. Jinho pushed his meal away, his appetite completely gone. What about the emergency protocols you mentioned? Ah, yes. Velt scrolled through more files. Immediately after the reception hall incident, Station Nexus activated emergency evacuation procedures. An entire sector of the station was cleared and sealed off for decontamination. All diplomatic activities were suspended for 6 months. Decontamination from what? The records do not specify. But within days of the incident, the Galactic Council implemented the current weapon restrictions for humans. They also established new protocols for human diplomatic contact, including mandatory psychological evaluations and limited interaction periods. Jinho ran his hands through his hair, trying to process all this information. So something happened involving humans, these Kethmori, and the Cyclone. The Kethmori disappeared completely, and now everyone treats humans like we're walking weapons. That appears to be the situation, yes. Velthar leaned back in his water-filled chair. But here is what troubles me most, Ambassador Kim. What's that? According to the records, the Cyclone Confederacy representatives who were present at the incident are still alive today. The Cyclone are an extremely long-lived species. Some of the same individuals who witnessed whatever happened 53 years ago are currently serving on the Galactic Council. Jinho's eyes widened. They know what really happened. Indeed. And they have been very, very quiet about it for over 5 decades. Jinho had almost given up hope of finding answers when help came from a completely unexpected place. Dr. Hannah Park was a Korean xenarchaeologist who had been studying ancient alien cultures at Station Nexus for the past 2 years. She worked in the research levels deep below the main diplomatic areas, spending her days examining old artifacts and records from long-dead civilizations. Hannah had heard about Jinho's arrival and the strange weapon restrictions through station gossip. Being the only other Korean on the station, she decided to introduce herself. The two met for coffee in a small cafe near the research section, far from the busy diplomatic quarters. I might be able to help you, Hannah said quietly, stirring her drink with a plastic spoon. I've been working closely with one of the archivists down in the deep storage levels. He's very old, even for his species, and sometimes he says things he probably shouldn't. Jinho looked around carefully to make sure no one was listening. What kind of things? His name is Kextao. He's a cyclone, one of those species with the color-changing skin and tentacles. He's been working in the archives for over 300 years. Hannah leaned closer. Yesterday, when I mentioned that another human had arrived on the station, he got very upset. Started talking about something that happened decades ago. The reception hall incident. Hannah nodded. He mentioned that name specifically. Said it was something the Galactic Council never wanted anyone to discuss again. 2 days later, Hannah invited Jinho to visit the archives. The deep levels of Station Nexus were much quieter than the upper diplomatic sections. Long corridors lined with storage units stretched in every direction. The air smelled old and dusty, like libraries on Earth. Kextel was exactly as Hannah had described him. He was tall and thin, with pale purple skin that shifted colors depending on his mood. Dozens of small tentacles grew from his head like hair, constantly moving and curling. His large black eyes seemed to hold the wisdom of centuries. "So you are the new human ambassador," Kextel said, in a voice that sounded like wind through leaves. "You look much like your predecessor." "My predecessor?" Jinho asked. The old archivist's skin suddenly turned a darker shade of purple. His tentacles began trembling slightly. "Ambassador Li Dongguiwuki. We should have realized then what your species was truly capable of." Hannah and Jinho exchanged glances. This was exactly what they had hoped for. "What do you mean?" Hannah asked gently. "What was Ambassador Li capable of?" Kextel looked around nervously, as if checking for hidden listeners. When he spoke again, his voice was barely above a whisper. It was 53 years ago. The Galactic Council was hosting a major trade conference. Many species attended, including some very dangerous ones. The old cyclone moved slowly toward a bank of storage containers, his tentacles still trembling with the memory. The Kethmori Empire sent their finest representatives. 12 of their elite warriors came as guards for their diplomats. "What were the Kethmori like?" Jinho asked. "Terrifying," Kextel replied immediately. Each warrior stood nearly 4 meters tall. Their skin was like natural armor, and they carried the most advanced weapons in the galaxy. Plasma rifles, molecular disruptors, energy shields. They were considered nearly invincible in combat. Jinho felt his stomach tighten. What happened? The Kethmori had been using their reputation to intimidate smaller species, Kextel continued. They would bring their warriors to negotiations and use the threat of violence to force unfavorable agreements. Many peaceful species had been forced to sign away mining rights to valuable planets. The archivist's skin shifted to an even darker color. During the main reception dinner, the Kethmori decided to target the human delegation. They surrounded Ambassador Li's table with all 12 warriors. Their weapons were powered and ready. Hannah leaned forward eagerly. "What did Ambassador Li do?" "At first, nothing." He continued, eating his soup calmly, while these massive warriors loomed over him. The entire dining hall went silent. Everyone thought we were about to witness a massacre. Kextel paused and looked directly at Jinho. The Kethmori had killed diplomats before, for much smaller insults. They were known for their brutal efficiency. But Ambassador Li survived, Jinho pointed out. "Oh yes, he survived." Kextel's tentacles writhed with agitation. He slowly stood up from his chair, placed his napkin on the table, and apologized politely to everyone in the dining hall for the inconvenience he was about to cause. The old archivist walked to a viewing window that looked out into space. "What happened next still gives me nightmares, even after all these years." "Tell us," Hannah whispered. In less than 2 minutes, all 12 Kethmori elite warriors were unconscious on the floor. Kextel's voice was filled with awe and terror. Ambassador Li had used only 3 items: his soup spoon, his necktie, and a small decorative orchid from the table centerpiece. Jinho felt his mouth go dry. "That's impossible." "I watched it happen," Kextel said firmly. "We all did." Ambassador Li moved like nothing I had ever seen before. The Kethmori warriors never had a chance to use their weapons. He struck pressure points, used leverage, turned their size against them. It was like watching a master artist at work. What happened after that? Kextel turned back to face them, his skin now a pale, frightened gray. Ambassador Li sat back down, picked up his spoon, and continued eating his soup as if nothing had happened. He even complimented the chef on the seasoning. The trade negotiations had been going badly for days. Jinho sat at the human delegation table, reviewing the latest proposal from the Krovax Dominion. The reptilian species wanted mining rights to 3 important human colonies, in exchange for what they claimed were protection services. Jinho knew it was nothing more than organized crime, dressed up in diplomatic language. The Krovax delegates were large muscular reptiles with dark green scales and bright yellow eyes. They had arrived at Station Nexus with an attitude of superiority, treating smaller species with obvious contempt. Their leader, War Chief Sektar, was particularly aggressive during negotiations. The human colonies are weak and defenseless, Sektar had hissed during the morning session. They need our protection from pirates and raiders. Our price is very reasonable. Jinho had politely refused their offer multiple times. The human colonies were perfectly capable of defending themselves, and everyone knew the Krovax were the very pirates they claimed to offer protection from. After the formal session ended, Jinho gathered his papers and headed toward his quarters. He needed time to think about alternative solutions to the trade disputes. The diplomatic quarters were busy with delegates from dozens of species, all discussing their own negotiations and agreements. Jin-Ho decided to take a shortcut through the maintenance levels of the station. The corridors down there were quieter, and he could think more clearly away from the constant noise and activity of the diplomatic areas. He had discovered this route on his second day, and often used it when he needed to clear his head. The maintenance corridor was dimly lit and narrow, with pipes and electrical conduits running along the walls. Jinho had walked about halfway through, when he heard heavy footsteps behind him. He turned to see 3 Krovax warriors following him, led by War Chief Sektar himself. Ambassador Kim, Sektar said with a smile that showed all his sharp teeth. How convenient to meet you here, away from all the cameras and witnesses. Jinho stopped walking and turned to face them fully. The corridor was too narrow for him to move around them easily. War Chief Sektar, is there something I can help you with? Perhaps the human needs some encouragement to reconsider our generous offer, Sektar hissed. His plasma rifle hummed as he powered it up. The weapon glowed with dangerous red energy. The 2 other Krovax warriors moved to flank Jinho, blocking any escape route. They were each nearly twice his size, with thick armor and heavy weapons. Their own plasma rifles charged with threatening sounds. Jinho sighed deeply and looked around the corridor carefully. A maintenance panel on the wall hung slightly loose, probably from vibrations caused by the station's engines. His diplomatic badge, made of some kind of dense metal, caught the light from the overhead fixtures. In his jacket pocket, he still carried the simple graphite pencil that had somehow passed through the security screening when he first arrived. I really don't want to do this, Jinho said calmly, his voice showing no fear despite the weapons pointed at him. My grandmother always taught me that violence should be the absolute last resort. Then surrender your colonies, human. Sektar snarled, raising his weapon higher. Sign our agreement, or we will make sure you have an unfortunate accident in this maintenance corridor. Jinho thought about his grandmother's other lessons. She had been a remarkable woman who survived the difficult years when Korea was rebuilding itself. She taught him about peace and diplomacy, but also about standing up for what was right. But she also taught me that sometimes you have to stand up to bullies. Jinho said quietly. What happened next took place in 18 seconds, though it felt much longer to everyone involved. The corridor's security system recorded everything, and the footage would later become required viewing at military academies across the galaxy. Jinho moved with sudden, precise efficiency. His diplomatic badge became a striking weapon that hit specific nerve clusters on the first Krovax warrior, causing immediate paralysis. The loose maintenance panel, when properly leveraged, created enough force to disable the second warrior's weapon and knock him unconscious. The simple pencil, applied to the right pressure points, put War Chief Sektar on the ground without even breaking the pencil's tip. All 3 Krovax warriors lay groaning on the corridor floor, their weapons scattered and useless. Jinho stood in the middle of them, breathing normally and looking slightly embarrassed by what he had been forced to do. When station security arrived, 2 minutes later, following emergency alerts from the corridor cameras, they found Jinho helping the injured Krovax to their feet and apologizing repeatedly for the inconvenience. "I'm so sorry this happened," Jinho was saying as he helped Sektar sit up against the wall. "I really hoped we could resolve our differences peacefully. Are you hurt badly? Should I call for medical assistance?" The security team, led by the same crystalline officer who had confiscated Jinho's belongings days earlier, stared in amazement at the scene. 3 elite Krovax warriors, known throughout the galaxy for their combat skills, had been defeated by a single human diplomat who was now fussing over their injuries like a concerned medic. "What happened here?" the security chief asked. "A misunderstanding," Jinho replied, still checking on the Krovax. "I think we can work out our trade differences much more easily now." Within 3 hours of the corridor incident, emergency alarms echoed throughout Station Nexus. The Galactic Assembly had called an immediate special session, something that had not happened in over 40 years. Representatives from 847 different species rushed to the Great Assembly Hall, filling every seat and floating platform. Jin-Ho stood in a small waiting room outside the hall, still wearing his diplomatic clothes from earlier. He could hear the buzz of hundreds of conversations in dozens of languages through the thick walls. Ambassador Velthor sat beside him, offering quiet support. "I never wanted this to happen," Jinho said, running his hands through his hair. "I just wanted to protect the human colonies from extortion." "You did what was necessary," Velthor replied, his gills fluttering with nervous energy. "But now the entire galaxy knows what your species is capable of." The massive doors to the assembly hall opened, and Jinho walked slowly toward the central speaking platform. The hall was enormous, with curved rows of seats rising up in all directions. Floating platforms held delegates whose species could not use traditional chairs. The noise level was incredible as hundreds of beings discussed what they had just witnessed. On the giant display screens around the hall, security footage from the maintenance corridor played on repeat. Jinho watched himself disable 3 armed Krovax warriors in 18 seconds using only a badge, a loose panel, and a pencil. Every time the footage played, the hall grew a little quieter. Jinho stepped up to the central podium and felt the weight of hundreds of alien eyes watching him. Some species had large compound eyes, others had multiple smaller ones, and a few had no visible eyes at all. But he could feel their attention like physical pressure. The ancient speaker of the assembly rose from the highest platform. The crystalline being was thousands of years old, and had helped found the galactic community long before humans even knew that aliens existed. When it spoke, its voice rang like musical chimes throughout the hall. "Ambassador Kim," the speaker said, "the Assembly requests an explanation for the events recorded in Maintenance Corridor 7. Jinho took a deep breath and looked around the hall. "Honored representatives, I believe there has been a fundamental misunderstanding about my species for many years." The hall grew completely silent. Even the translator devices seemed to pause before converting his words into hundreds of different languages. "Humans do not seek violence," Jinho continued. "In fact, most humans spend their entire lives never harming another thinking being. We build schools, hospitals, and art museums. We write poetry and compose music. We explore space not to conquer, but to learn and discover." A delegate from the insectoid Mentari species clicked its mandibles impatiently. "Yet you disabled 3 trained warriors in seconds." "Because we are adaptable," Jinho replied. "Our military philosophy, our entire way of thinking, is based on one simple idea. Any environment contains everything you need to solve a problem. You just have to be creative enough to see the possibilities." Jinho reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his simple graphite pencil. He held it up so everyone in the hall could see it clearly. "This is not a weapon," he said. "It is a tool for writing, for creating, for sharing ideas between people who want to understand each other. I have used this pencil to sign peace treaties and friendship agreements." He paused and looked directly at the Krovax delegation, where War Chief Sektar sat with his arm in a medical support device. "But when someone threatens my people, or threatens innocent beings who cannot protect themselves, then this pencil becomes whatever I need it to become, not because I want to hurt anyone, but because I refuse to let bullies win through intimidation." From the Cyclone delegation area, old Kextel slowly rose to his feet. His tentacles moved with the careful precision of great age, and his skin showed the deep purple colors of serious thought. "Ambassador Kim speaks the truth," Kextel said in his ancient voice. "The weapon restrictions were never meant as an insult to humanity. They were our recognition of a simple fact. Your species does not need weapons because your species is a weapon. Everything in your environment becomes an extension of your will when necessary." The speaker's crystalline body chimed thoughtfully as it processed this information. "A compromise then, Ambassador Kim. Humans may carry one cultural item of their choosing into diplomatic areas, but perhaps you could provide guidance about what other species should consider, concerning when dealing with humans." Ginho smiled for the first time since the incident occurred. He looked around the great hall at hundreds of different species, many of whom now appeared slightly nervous. "Honestly," he said, "if a human truly wants to hurt you, these restrictions will not matter. We once had a soldier who held off an entire enemy invasion using nothing but rubber bands and office supplies from an abandoned building. Several delegates shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But if a human is sitting peacefully at a negotiation table with you, trying to find solutions that work for everyone, then you are probably safer than you have ever been in your life." Jinho tucked his pencil back into his jacket pocket. "We prefer to build bridges rather than burn them. It just happens that we are very, very good at both." The assembly voted to maintain modified restrictions while allowing humans to carry one cultural implement. As delegates filed out of the hall, every species representative made mental notes to review their first contact protocols with humanity. In the back of the hall, Ambassador Velthor was already writing a research proposal titled Human Problem Solving, a study in creative adaptation